Well, this is 619 Washington. That is the current address. When it was built, it was 20 Washington Street. When and where it was built is a long story. And I put together a slideshow that has some general orientation at the beginning and then goes through in a more chronological order. So there is the house as it looks. Some recent Christmas ago when we put on some redwood boughs, garland. It is a Greek revival style house, basically. I have a wife, Cabell, and we were looking to buy a house, get the same time we're going to get married. And we were looking in mostly the east side of Santa Cruz. We thought we could afford a 2-bedroom cottage, not much more. We thought we better buy now or we'll never be able to afford to buy in Santa Cruz. So one day, out of frustration, it was just taking us a long time to make offers or do counters, and we weren't getting places. So out of frustration, our realtor drove us by this place on Washington Street and said, would you like to live there? And we weren't particularly interested in historical houses, but we said, well, sure, but we can't afford it. And the realtor said, well, I'm not so sure. You see, it's a duplex. And you can rent out part of the duplex as a business and you get depreciation, you get rent. And let me work up let me get you in there to see it because it's for sale. And then let me show you some numbers about how it might work, that this would be as affordable as a 2-bedroom cottage on the east side. So we said, okay. And we ended up buying it in May of 1981 for $172,000. As we live in it right now, the downstairs is a 1,700 square foot unit. We live there, Cabell and I live there, and it's got 3 bedrooms, 2 baths. Sort of stretches deep into the lot. And the upstairs is an 800 square foot 2-bedroom apartment. And our daughter, what? You have a question? Our daughter and her boyfriend live there. So that is the house. And here is the first picture. The oldest picture that I can find of the house is out of John Chase's book. And which was 1974, maybe took the photo in 73. At that point, we understand the house is in really bad shape. It was just at the beginning of the private redevelopment of downtown by the Abbotts, led by the Abbotts at least. And they had a contractor that did a lot of the private redevelopment work. You will notice the house to the right is now 621 Washington. Mary Kate, you've already met, lives there. When the house was built, it would have been 18 Washington Street. And Washington Street, when it was built, it was being extended south from Laurel.
Hi, Amy. Hi, good morning, everybody. And now, relationship,
Was that a question or should I go on?
On. Someone wasn't muted. Go on.
Okay. So Washington Street, the lower addresses were started at Laurel Street and increased as you went south towards the ocean. And Washington Street addresses actually extended out onto the wharf. They would have had Washington Street addresses at the time. Sometime after World War I, the address system got changed and they reversed the direction of the addresses, and that's why the house on the left is R619 and the house on the right is Mary Kate's, which is 621. Her house was built sometime in the 80s, and the gable piece right there was built in the style of an Eastlake house, which was her style. Her house is Eastlake. Our house is much simpler, Greek Revival, built in the 1860s, but they modernized our house in the 1880s by putting the same bracket piece in there. So an architectural historian will look at our house and say something's wrong there because that detail doesn't work with the age of the rest of the details. So here are the two houses again in the city's historic inventory by Charles Paul Page. And it pretty much explains the same thing about the two houses. Clearly they're related. The picture's a little newer because between 74 and 76, the two houses were bought by two different people and fixed up. And I'll get to that later. And here are what the two houses currently look like. For your general orientation, here's just a Sanborn map, the insurance map from 1872, showing that the two houses were on the same parcel. In fact, there were additional buildings behind them going all the way to what looks like a house being fronting on Chestnut. In the upper right, that used to be the Congregational Church on the corner of Center and Lincoln. Now it's the Boys and Girls Club. And just for general orientation, that's the corner of Washington. That's the corner of Washington and Lincoln. And that's Professor Hastings' house, who was led a band that played at the boardwalk and commercially around town. And I'll be using that as some reference points going later. On Sanborn maps, the wood frame construction is in yellow and concrete construction is in blue. So there were at that point two concrete houses in the neighborhood. I can't find any evidence that even a part of the concrete buildings are still around. So when we moved in, our nice neighbor who lived in what is now Mary Kate's house came over to greet us. Her name was Ruth. And she gave us this newspaper article from 1975. And it is actually this house, our house, 619, was on the YWCA tour, and this was an article just previewing the YWCA tour and discussing this lady's effort to save the house. So she bought the house in 75. Let me check my notes. Now, she bought it in 1974 in a dilapidated state and paid the construction crew associated with the private development of downtown, the Abbott's effort, and fixed up the house. It was on redwood mud cells. She put a modern concrete foundation underneath it. Did a lot of new wiring, a lot of structural repairs, new bathrooms, new kitchen. Tried to save what she could save. But the most interesting thing in the whole article is this sentence. This house is believed to have been built in 1860 by Thomas J. Weeks, who sold it in 1867, 1868. So when I started researching 30 years ago, when I started researching the history of my house, I was looking for Weeks. I did not end up, the end of the story is he had built the house, but that was just a false lead, but it was hard to get proof. But it sent me looking. And so just in my free time and no particular expertise, I looked at deeds, I looked at the census, I looked at city directories, the 2 historic inventories. I spent a lot of time going through microfilm at the library, looked at the Cavello photo collection, UCSC special collections, and found a little bit. The most helpful thing is the doing a chain of title going back from us. And so this begins sort of a chronological discussion. So I did a chain of title, and we're down here in 1981, down here. And then going backwards, I went all the way back to a gentleman named Juan Gonzalez, who acquired the property in 1839 when it was Mexican territory. He got it as a land grant from the local mayor. And he ended up selling about 30 acres of his land. He was supposed to farm the land, and he ended up farming it during the gold rush and making a whole bunch of money selling potatoes. And then he sold out to William Blackburn, who owned everything from Neary Lagoon up to what is now Lincoln Street. And then he sold to Thomas Weeks, who was the name we got from the Sentinel article. And Weeks subdivided the land in 1867. So let's, I'll come back to this later once, but Cabell and I are the people who have owned the house the longest. And I like to say, nothing important has happened there, and nobody important has ever lived there. It's just a normal set of folks. So what I could find on Don Juan Gonzalez, was he was, oh, I'll tell you a little bit about him. He came to California as a child in the Diaz expedition, which went from northern Mexico to settle the civil settle of the Monterey Bay area in 1775. It was not very well supported in terms of additional money or goods. So the people were sort of just scraping by in a civil settlement in a pueblo. Well, no, they weren't in the pueblo. They were on the other side of the river. They were on the mission side of the river. Don Juan Gonzalez ended up being the major domo of the mission. So he was the guy who ran the mission. And when he owned the land and was farming it, we found out that Tuesday was his irrigation day. He got water in the morning. The mode of irrigation was there was a ditch coming down High Street from the three springs, los tres ojos de agua, and that fed the whole town as an open ditch. And the different people got different farmers got different watering dates, and Mr. Gonzalez's water was on Tuesday morning. And of course, the article starts out by being, it's a dry year, we have to ration water. So this is how we're going to do it. So the first American deed was from Gonzalez to William Blackburn in 1851. And it was handwritten in the local deeds book 1. And then, since Mr. Blackburn was paying a lot of money to Mr. Gonzalez for these 30 acres, he wanted some proof that Mr. Gonzalez owned it and wanted to get it on the American records. So he recorded Mr. Gonzalez's land grant from the Mexican alcalde. So here's the first page and the second page of the deed from Gonzalez to Blackburn. And then there is the deed that Mr. Blackburn asked the recorder to hand copy the land grant from the alcalde to Mr. Gonzalez. With my high school Spanish, I translated it. So this is not a professional translation, but it'll get you the meaning. Jose Balakov, constitutional mayor of the town of Rancho 40, in charge of the establishment of Santa Cruz, because Mr. Juan Gonzalez is worthy to obtain lands that he has settled and hopes to work, and using the authority that the departmental government is awarded to permit occupation of settled land in the establishment of Santa Cruz, I deem to allow that he occupy property 300 varas long and 300 varas wide in the flats in front of the Santa Cruz mission, and give this title to the interested party for him to keep. Given this 30th day of September 1839, Jose Balkov, our Russian turned Mexican mayor of Santa Cruz. And a vara is a pace, and it's generally 33 inches. So that would have been about 16 acres of land south of Lincoln Street and west of Washington Street, going over as far as the athletic field at the high school. So here is a map one of the early maps of Santa Cruz showing Weeks property there. And to the north is, let's see, that's Lincoln. That's Laurel. At this point, Washington doesn't exist. Here's Pacific. Here's Pacific. A little bit of Cedar. None of Center, and none of Washington, and none of Chestnut. One thing I'm going to keep showing you is this corner here is Pacific and Laurel. Where that red dot is used to be Taco Bell. And now there's a big building being built there. Front Street would have been on the other side of, if Front Street got extended, it would have been on the other side of the river. So the river had a bend right, so that would be flowing right under Taco Bell if it was still there before the levees were built. Beach Hill is pretty well developed. This is Mission Street going out of town, Bay Street. Here's Neary Lagoon. So at this point, I was researching Weeks. And so I went off into the two of the websites that have family trees, and didn't get any information that really helped. So that was a dead end. Other than Thomas Weeks was not related to William Weeks, the architect. One came from Maine, one came from the Midwest somewhere. And it was just a coincidence that they both ended up in Santa Cruz and had a lot to do with the development of the town. So this is the 1866 map of the neighborhood. My house is in, where it is now is in blue. And let's see. So the Episcopal Church is still there. Center Street is just a little stub off of Lincoln. Generally, the property on the north side of Lincoln is not developed. One of the major owners of land on the east side of what is now Washington Street was Dreher, D-R-E-H-E-R. The Dreher House was also a Greek revival. It was built about 1860, but it was a farmhouse out in the middle of the property. It's certainly possible that Weeks was a farmer and built a farmhouse out in the middle of the property, and that could be our house, but I just couldn't find anything to substantiate that. Also, it's a little bit odd. If he were a farmer, you'd think maybe he would build a house closer to Lincoln Street rather than putting his house in the middle of the property, build it closer to where there was access and a way to town. Oh, and here it is again. Here's the river flowing all the way to Pacific and Laurel. So researching Tom Weeks, here's a picture of him at the California Pioneers. It was taken many years later. Mr. Weeks subdivided the land in 1867. It was a standard subdivision with city-sized lots. He built the streets, put in the utilities, and started selling off lots. And I've never found the subdivision map. I'm still looking. If any of you can help, let me know. This was my working map that I just used, a county assessor's map. The blue is my house. The house to the north, the 22-foot wide property is Mary Kate's property with the house at 621 Washington. Now they were on the same lot 21 of the subdivision. And my handwritten notes are trying to keep track of what are the lots, because when lands were transferred in the deeds, they usually referred to lots. So I started poking around to see if later property owners had actually built the house. I looked at Ira Howe and his wife Mary. I looked at Josiah Green, who seemed to be more of a real estate investor than anything else. And I found some stuff on Howe. So in November of '67, this was in it was in the Weekly Sentinel. It talks about the Weeks tract. Already had several houses on it: Green, McDougall, Colby, Taylor, Cathcart. And Cathcart had a concrete house. Did not mention any of the other names. Didn't mention Weeks, didn't mention Howe, didn't mention Green. And here is one of the highlights of our tour today. During COVID, I decided I was finally going to try and research this and get to the point where I could submit for a blue plaque, but I had to figure out who built the house and when did they build it. And the magical piece was the California Digital Newspaper Collection out of UC Riverside, and it is indexed. So I could search Washington Street, Howe, Green, Weeks, and this was what allowed me, along with some other things I'm going to show you, to determine that the house was not built by Weeks. It was built by the Howes in the Weeks edition, because Mr. Howe was a carpenter from upstate New York, and he was building a house. He bought about 7 lots, all adjacent to one another in Weeks edition, and was building on one of them. And a big storm came through in 1887 and knocked the house down in the framing stage. In the course of erection, the Howe house was damaged at an estimate of $300 to $500. It talks about other storm events that day, including roads being impassable and a roof being blown off of somebody else's house. It talked about one of the sandbars, not sandbars, well, I'm not finding it in my memory, but it talked about the river took out some of the structures that were designed to steer the river into a different course. In Deeds, I successfully found the homestead. So the Howes bought the property from Weeks in 67. And when they completed the house in 1868, they filed a homestead so that it protected them from the house being taken due to business debts. And on the second page it says together with a dwelling house thereon. So I think that's my house. That's 1868. Here is an 1870 lithograph that some commercial artist did of the town, and it is often cited because it shows everything in great detail. Here's Bay Street coming down to the Cal Wharf. Here's the main beach with a wharf there. This is Beach Hill. This is the Blackburn property, Neary Lagoon. There's Laurel Street going from the corner of Pacific up the hill to Mission. And now we have Pacific, Cedar, Center, Washington, and Chestnut all in. New Street has not been built yet. It's a small street between Cedar and Center. You can see the Episcopal Church. And at the end of the blue arrow is a series of houses with a series of big trees along the Washington Street. And one of them's mine. I can't tell which one. This is a little closer detail. You start seeing images. I tried to look at the roof shapes, and that's approximately where my house is. Currently, New Street runs right through here between Center and Washington. Of course, this is the high school playfield over here. Yeah, but this is Weeks Track and this is Weeks Track. So he subdivided from Washington over to, I think, Chestnut, and from Lincoln down to Laurel. Here's the 1870 census showing the Howes living in the house. Mr. Howe is a carpenter. Mrs. Howe is keeping house, and they have 3 children, ages 8, 4, and 2. And they have 2 boarders, Charles Howe, who's a teamster, and William Peabody, who's a physician. In 1871, the Howe's friends celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary, and being a small town, a party makes the paper. Here's an ad out of the Sentinel where Mr. Howe is got a 2-story business building on Chestnut Street behind our house. And it's a carpenter shop, furniture store, and undertaking establishment. This was 72. The Howes moved on in 1875. They moved up to Lake County and bought a hotel in Kelseyville. Here is what I'm pretty sure is my house and my lot. 1.5-story house, 9 rooms, outhouses, neatly fenced, orchard, shrubbery. And Ira Howe is trying to sell it. It didn't turn out too well. I think Howe ended up being foreclosed upon by Josiah Green. And in the interim, Howe passed away. So Mary Howe was named in the foreclosure after 1877. So the foreclosure was in 1881. Moving right along, here's another fun thing that happened in the house. There was a wedding celebration for the lady who grew up in the house. Her last name was Kay, Florence Kay, and she married what must be a spectacularly nice gentleman named Sevy McCormick. No relation to me, but it's a fun coincidence. And that was 1901. By 1906, the house was a boarding house called the Merced. One fun side story is I found there's actually a research on the sidewalks of Washington Street, and they were built in 1908. And one of the side stories is they stamped the names of the streets on the corners, but didn't get all of the spellings correctly. So this is one misspelling that exists today. I'm aware of two more. So if you wander through the neighborhood, one of the fun things to do is to look for the misspellings of the streets. My neighbor, Mary Kate's house at what was then 18 Washington Street and is now 621 Washington Street. I found an interesting entry in the 1910 census. There was a lady named May Fanning living there. And look what her profession is. This is from the census itself. I think she was a medium. Moving right along, and it starts to speed up here because there's not a whole lot of history going forward. This is the Sanborn map in 1928 showing all the outbuildings. So this is a house. This is the layout of the house that I would recognize. Two-story section, and then the back half is a one-story section where the kitchen was. They had a big outbuilding, some sort of shed. And by that time, the back lots had been sold off. And by that time, Mary Kate's parcel had been split off, had been deeded off, and she would recognize, her front room and her second sets of rooms. And since then, there's been an addition in the back where that outbuilding was. This is an aerial photo I got from the university. It just shows the neighborhood, and it shows, well, a lot of railroad tracks down at the depot. It shows some farming at the baseball and tennis courts at the high school. It shows, here's the high school building. So there obviously was a 1908 earthquake, and I don't know how the house did, but the house was remodeled sometime about 1929, because when we were doing our earthquake repairs in 1990, we opened up one of the downstairs walls, and a woman's magazine was in it in its entirety. Moving forward to the earthquake itself, that was right after the '89 earthquake. Our house shook a whole lot. Some windows broke. Some friend came by and took our photo, and we were a little frazzled, but trying to decide whether to get out of town or whether to stay and fix the house up. We ended up doing our earthquake repairs in about 1990, which stabilized the house. We redid a lot of electrical work. What else? Mostly we needed to structurally stabilize the house because it was balloon frame construction. It just didn't have any shear resistance to lateral forces. Interestingly, we had a chimney, and a lot of our neighbors' chimneys fell in the '89 earthquake, but ours didn't. It was small, and it was pretty well braced all the way up through the house and didn't stick too far above the roof. We ended up remodeling the back of the first story in 2010, just to make the house more livable and to continue to stay in it. Redid the bathrooms and the kitchens. So here is what the prior owner added, which were the sort of the shed roofs onto the back of the house. And when we did our remodel, we demolished down to the subfloor and rebuilt much more structurally compatible with the two-story old section of the house. And on the inside, this here is what the house looked like between 1975 and 2010. That's the kitchen, showing the orange Formica countertops and the brown vinyl flooring, aluminum windows. It was very livable, but it didn't have much historic feeling. Certainly didn't age well. So when we did the 2010 remodel, this is what the same, this upper right is what that same corner of the kitchen looks like now, and it looks wooden floors. It's a nice kitchen, nice place to be. So I showed you earlier from the Sentinel article showing the prior owner sitting at her desk in the front room. This is what the front room looks like now. Not much different. We took out a bookcase against the far wall when we were doing our earthquake repairs. But other than that, the room is pretty much unchanged from when she fixed up the house in '75. You're looking through the window at Mary Kate's house, which is green. And then I had enough information to propose to the museum that this should be identified as an 1868 house built by Mary and Ira Howe in the Greek Revival style. There's another Howe in town that these people are unrelated to. His name was Fred Howe. He has an historic house up in California, and he was mayor. Again, it's just a coincidence as far as I can tell. Same name, but not related. The Howes. So I'm done with my pitch. I'm still looking for photos before 1975. I'm still looking for the original Weeks edition subdivision map. There may be a story about the big house and the little house. Would be wonderful to find out a little bit more about what they were and how they related. So thank you for your interest today, and